studies to practice. nothing I could learn from you.
No one sits in on my class for free.
The legions I command.
Fireheart versus Slate.
I'm terribly sorry to fight you, but the headmaster requires it.
You can always withdraw from the competition, Professor.
Be yours to lose then.
I knew I'd be fighting you for my promotion.
The legions I command.
You don't pick the one, silly. What makes something real?
Join or die.
which is
Exactly. And that's
frustrating because like I'm pretty sure when it comes to like actual core values, I'm pretty sure about 99% of humanity agrees on like 95% of topics. Like most people
right.
want to be healthy, have clothes, have food, have a school to send, right? And then like our disagreements are not anywhere near as major as people seem to make them out to be. Like I don't think the average liberal in the United States wants every cop to be killed, and I don't think the average conservative in the United States, wants every single black person thrown into jail for like smoking weed. Yeah, it's. Ugh. God, I have a big question for you today that I'm very curious about. That I've heard a lot of people talk around.
You got me nervous now.
Just like fascinating macro development in U.S. foreign policy that I'm so curious about. Hold on, I'm sure you've thought about this.
First and foremost, by the way, speaking as your northern neighbor, congratulations on the election results. I mean, we're all pretty happy about that.
Yeah, we'll see. Just don't congratulate us yet, okay? We voted him out of office. It doesn't mean we've removed him from office.
Well, you have a really curious system there. You've got like 2.5 months between the election and the actual taking of office by the incumbent.
Yeah, actually,
why does it take so long?
I'm not actually sure. I was actually curious if that was the case with other countries as well.
No, not at all.
Do you guys in Canada, do they just leave afterwards, or?
Pretty well, yeah. Once the election is held, it might be a really small sort of handover phase, but it sure as hell isn't 2.5 months.
Huh. Yeah, that's really weird. I don't know why that is the case in the U.S. I'm not sure. Because it seems like, are you familiar with the term lame duck?
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like it would contribute to that quite a bit. They're like, oh, well, I'm here for a few more months, but I'm out anyway. So
Yeah. The problem is, though, the guy that just lost isn't going to be very lame for the next 2 months. He's going to do all kinds. I mean, we're already seeing it, right? In terms of people he's firing. It just seems like he just took his old role as the firer, just to fire everybody in sight.
Yeah, maybe. Hopefully that's him just being power tripping and not setting up for any kind of crazy stuff. But yeah, I guess we'll see. Okay, before we start, do you want to introduce yourself so that people have an idea of who you are and what we generally talk about?
Sure. Yeah, so my name is Phil Gursky. I am Canadian. I spent more than 3 decades in security intelligence in my country, working for the Canadian counterparts of the National Security Agency and kind of like an FBI-CIA hybrid called CSIS, Canadian Security Intelligence Service. Kind of a counterterrorism guy. I've written 5 books on counterterrorism around the world in the past 5 years, and so remain active monitoring, kind of what's happening on the terrorism front, who's who in the zoo, who's doing what, and what kind of progress, if any, that we're making so far.
Yeah, so I know that you reached out to me to talk. There are 2 major questions that I have regarding U.S. foreign policy. I don't know if you want to start, or if you want me to start, or how you want it.
Go ahead.
Okay. Minor one and a major one. Do you want the major one first or the minor one first?
Let's get the big one out of the way right away.
Big one out of the way first. Something that I am so intensely curious about. I need to remember names so that I sound more credible instead of saying I heard from this, but I've watched a lot of these little conferences or whatever. One major thing that seems to be different now, that has never been the case in the stage of like world politics, is the United States is like refining and drilling so much oil now, because we've had access to, I think it's the shale oil or whatever, through fracking or whatever. We are making so much more that I've heard some people say that the Middle East is becoming an area of where it might be of somewhat of a geopolitically important area for whatever reasons related to Russia or China. But in terms of like securing oil or having a good relationship with like OPEC or whatever, that the U.S. might not be as concerned about that anymore. That if Iran wants to go over and drone strike some Saudi Arabia refineries or whatever, as may or may not have happened in the past, that the U.S. just doesn't actually care that much. And that this might herald like some like new direction in U.S. foreign policy where, because we have so much energy independence at the moment, we have a less of a vested interest in parts of the Middle East or the greater Middle East region. What do you think about that in general? Do you think it's hogwash or what? I'm curious.
Well, I definitely have heard that, because of things like fracking and advanced technologies and getting at oil that wasn't, economical to get in the past, that you guys are doing really, really well on the oil front. And we're doing the same thing here in Canada, right? Although the problem with ours is ours are mostly trapped in what are called oil sands, and it's very expensive to get out of the ground, unlike fracking. So you have an advantage right there. And you're absolutely right. I mean, no one really would give a rat's ass about the Middle East if it had not been for oil. You think back to, I'm old enough to remember the oil shock of the 70s and the fact that we had to really, kowtow to the Saudis and everybody else. And so we paid them attention, because prior to that, most people couldn't find it on a map and simply didn't care. It just wasn't an important part of the world. And so if they get to a point where nobody needs the oil that they're pulling out of the ground, with the exception of maybe some Central Asian nations, I'm not sure what the situation in Europe is like. They don't have a lot of oil in Europe, although there's massive finds off the coast of Turkey and stuff like that, off Greece as well. But that may take time to develop. But the fact remains is that we care about what's happening there, largely because of the fact that we needed a product that they had in the 70s, the 80s, and 90s. And that has now changed. And the problem is, Stephen, is that, the relationship that especially your country and some others that created with Saudi Arabia beginning in the 70s, because of the fact that they could basically pump this stuff out of the ground for like a nickel a barrel, we basically bent over and took it from the Saudis, which allowed them to make a gazillion dollars and use that money to spread their intolerant, hateful version of Islam. We call it Wahhabist Islam, which is in fact sort of the fountainhead for a lot of modernism and extremism. People see the Saudis are our friends and allies. They're the guys that caused this in the first place. And they wouldn't have done that had they not had a gazillion dollars in the bank that they could use to send creatures and material around the world that they got from us because we fought their oil. So I would actually welcome a day in which the Middle East went back to just being another part of the planet that wasn't occupying all of our attention and that we didn't pay an inordinate amount of time and money for it. I mean, that would be a good thing as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I'm just kind of curious generally. The guy that I'm citing, and I know that he's controversial, and I need to be careful because, especially because my knowledge of foreign policy can be limited, so it's very easy for me to get swayed dramatically by one person, is, I don't know if you ever heard the name Peter Zilhan?
No, actually I haven't.
Okay.
I do follow this stuff kind of closely, so I'm curious why I haven't heard of that.
I think he's more like economics plus geopolitics, not just, Zihan, maybe I might have pronounced it right. Zihan, Zihan, I don't know.
No, it doesn't.
Okay,
Sounds German, yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
But I mean, the bottom line is that the Middle East isn't going to drop it through the center of the earth tomorrow kind of thing.
Of course, yeah.
But I do think that we have expended an awful lot of blood and treasure in wars and doing things because we needed that resource. And if in part because of the American surplus in oil, and in part because of the greening of technology and the greening of energy, these guys are simply nobody cares anymore. I can see it only being a good thing, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, and then so my second question is everything is always the most extreme that you've ever seen in your life because this is the most important election ever. This blah blah blah.
Yeah,
So I'm still kind of sort of young, middle age, whatever, 31. This is going to be the most.
Oh God, you're young.
Yeah, this is going to be the most whiplash I've ever had from one administration to the next. We're going from what it seems to be one of the most borderline authoritarian kind of sort of fascist administrations I've ever seen in my life to what is arguably going to be one of the most progressive agendas that we've ever had. Hopefully in terms of foreign policy as well. How do you ever cut a deal with the United States relating to anything foreign policy-wise when this type of whiplash can come every 4 years? I'm thinking especially in regards to things like the Iranian nuclear agreement or in regards to how we treat North Korea.
Well, you raise a very good question, right? Because a lot of these deals and relationships that we create depend on the fact that they're going to be reliable in nature. And so when you're dealing with the North Koreans or the Iranians or the Chinese or the Russians or whatever, you need people in place, in power, in administration who aren't going to change their minds every 5 minutes like the former president did, and that really basically throw a horseshoe into this and like no one knows what's coming next. So that's one thing, in fact, I think is you're going to see an incredibly better managed system, and that is your country's foreign policy relationship with its allies, including Canada, including NATO, including the European Union, because there's going to be the expectation that at least for the next 4 years that there'll be a consistency there. Whereas with the previous guy, the consistency lasted 5 minutes until he tweeted something asinine and he changed his mind yet again. Now, if in 4 years' time something else happens and you get what you're calling another whiplash to another candidate that is equally, well, hopefully no one's as equally as bad as the guy that's getting out of office, but a candidate that is maybe a little less dependable or a little less predictable, yeah, that does cause a problem. I mean, look, governments change all the time. I mean, we have gone between conservative and liberal in Canada for the past 20 or 30 years. But there has been more or less a consistency in how we, handle our foreign policy. Even if there are differences in philosophy between those two political parties, you don't have that wide swing between, something completely on one end of the spectrum, something on the other end of the spectrum. I'm looking very forward, I think, to the Biden administration. I think from what I've seen so far, and I'm certainly not an expert in U.S. politics, that there is a sanity. But maybe, given what we've seen over the last 4 years, anything looks better. But I do think there are a lot of very positive points that we can look forward to in terms of at least a stability in moving forward on a multilateral basis. At least we're going to have this notion that when the president says something, he's not going to change his mind 5 minutes later. We can work with that, even if there are disagreements. So I think from that perspective, that's a very good thing.
At least within the administration, yeah. Hopefully, though, it doesn't. I guess the only fear now is that I guess when you see something as historic as like the Iranian nuclear agreement just undone with the stroke of a pen, I wonder going forward if that hurts our ability to negotiate. And then it feels like, I guess since World War II, it feels like, and man, my lack of history knowledge might be showing, it feels like this is the first time it felt like America was taking a step back from kind of being a world leader, where we didn't want as much to do with any allies, we didn't care as much about the UN, we didn't care as much about NATO. Where the US was really abdicating a lot of ground, like, screw these trade deals, screw this, these big multilateral agreements or whatever. You've got people like Angela Merkel, I think, saying, maybe it's time for the EU to look past the US for leadership.
They've been saying that for years now. But I think what the real concerning point for those of us, in Canada, in NATO, and European Union, was not just the fact that we were being dismissed and that, long-standing relationships were being thrown under the bus on a daily basis. I mean, we can deal with that because administrations change. But it was the opposite side of that coin, and then the people that were being embraced, like Putin, like Erdogan in Turkey, like Xi Jinping in China, like the North Koreans. It was bad enough that these, like you said, we've had 75 years of these relationships in the post-World War II world, and we've had our disagreements, but for the most part, we've gotten along, we've worked together. That's bad enough. Then had the guy that chucked you under the bus, then to hop in bed with dictators and people that are slaughtering, in the case of Xi Jinping, his policy in Xinjiang against the Uyghurs and in Tibet, like that to me is like that's sort of you threw us under the bus and then you reversed the bus and drove over us again by the fact that you completely rejected what we all thought was the one way forward, or probably the best or the, I don't know, maybe not the best, but a pretty damn good way forward, and you basically decided to throw your lot in with a bunch of people that are completely antithetical to everything we've been working for the past 75 years. That really, really hurt.
Do you think when looking at Trump's foreign policy decisions, this is a very kind of personal opinion question, do you see more malevolence or stupidity? I'm just curious.
I would say probably more the latter. in the sense that, I mean, I just don't think he's a very bright man. I don't think he's the kind of guy that spent his life worrying about these issues.
Yeah.
Let's face it, you know, you look at presidents or prime ministers, whatever, most of them, you know, a lot of our lawyers, or, you know, they come up and they actually know something. Like, they've actually studied something. This guy was an entertainer right from day one. He didn't have any foreign policy experience. He didn't have any domestic policy experience. He didn't have any experience on anything aside from, you know, running, you know, starring in shitty television shows. And all of a sudden now he's the president of the United States. So why would you expect someone like that to have, you know, wise, deeply considered decisions? No, because he's capable of doing it. Was it malevolent? Possibly, because he just seems to be a very malevolent kind of guy. Like, piss him off once and that's the end of it kind of thing. I mean, yeah, look at people he's fired, look at the decisions that he's made. He holds a grudge forever, right? If you don't agree with what he says, then you're toast. So I think there probably was a malevolence to it, but I would say more it's just that he had no idea what he was doing, and because he fired advisors, like, you know, twice a week he'd fire somebody, and he'd only bring in people that would say things that he wanted to hear. Whereas what you wanted advisors is somebody, you know what, Mr. President, you're wrong. We've looked at this, and this is the best way forward. I know you don't like it, but we've got some smart people that are looking at this, and frankly, sir, we don't think you should do what you're doing. If no one tells you that, and you go ahead with your gut feeling, which is based on nothing, why are you surprised that you have these foreign policy and domestic policy decisions you have over the last 4 years? It just stands to reason, right?
Yeah. That's always how it comes off to me. There's always there are people on both sides where there are people on the right that think that Trump is like a very ingenious political figure and he's maneuvered everything exactly. There are people on the left that think that Trump has undermined democracy in a very specific, very pointed way with a lot of you know, intentionality in mind. But yeah, I see him as just kind of like bumbles around and is a little bit of a selfish fuck.
That's how it strikes me. And I'm not you know, look, I'm not an expert on U.S. you know, foreign policy, U.S. domestic policy, but as an interested observer, it just seems to me that that's what's dictating the types of things that he does.
Okay, those are kind of the two huge questions I had.
Not too bad. I thought it'd be worse than that.
Yeah, no, just kind of curious about. Believe it or not, well, you do believe it. Your intent is probably much the same. Foreign policy, just in this part of the world, is not really something that people talk about or care about much, regardless of what's going on. Save like for major terrorist attacks. Yeah.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, you know, elections are run on domestic policy, and the fact remains is that had it not been for COVID and the economy had been doing better in your country, you didn't have, you know, 1 million cases and 100,000 deaths, whatever it is, he probably would have been reelected. I mean, it was agonizingly close, right? Which those of us outside like how is this even possible that this election is going down to the wire? Like, it should have been, you know, we should have had like a Nixon moment in 72, where what did he win, like 50 out of the 51 states or something? The fact that it was like 50-50 was just mind-boggling. But it's because, you know, thankfully, well, this is a terrible thing to say, but you know, the fast backwards approach to COVID from the day one is probably one of the reasons why he lost a lot of his support. But all politics is local. They say no one cares what happens to Tajikistan. You've got professionals to worry about that, and sometimes you know, but your average American or Canadian can't find Tajikistan on a map.
Sure.
And they're not casting a vote based on, you know, Tajik politics or
sure.
What should we do about Azerbaijan and Armenia and the recent war over Nagorno-Karabakh? That doesn't win you votes. Is there a chicken in my pot? Can my kids go to school? Or is it safe to walk down the street? That's what decides who you vote for.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think I was going to mention in terms of the election being close, one thing that I do think is pretty ahistoric is the partisan divide has just gotten unbelievable. I should look it up, but I'm pretty sure Trump's approval rating is still like higher than 90% among Republicans. Like the partisan divide right now in the United States is just unbelievable.
When you're seeing that now, even like the fact that he's lost, and then like no one in the Republican Party is saying anything against him, right? They're going along with all these lies about, you know, voter fraud and fake ballots and stuff being burned and all. I mean, you know, guys, I mean, maybe, and that's for internal political or party reasons, maybe. I don't really understand that. But yeah, the partisanship is actually quite frightening. I mean, this is a time where you want this sort of non-partisanship. Now, we have it here in Canada. I'm not going to lie to you. I just don't see it as stark and as divisive up here as I see it in your country. And that, you know, that's not good going forward. So we'll see what happens with this presidency. We'll see how it goes. Will Biden live long enough for a second term? Yeah, well, we'll find out in 4 years' time, I suppose. But will this continue into the 2024 election?
Yeah.
You know, I hope not, because there are a lot of things that we're worried about right now, and they need bipartisan support. I mean, my understanding is that the Senate's going to remain in Republican control. Is that true?
We don't know.
Pretty close, right?
They have 50 seats right now. You need 50 plus a vice president to have a majority. So there's going to be 2 re-elections in Georgia.
Yeah, I heard. Yeah,
which is historically, I'm pretty sure, a red state, but went blue, and there's going to be a lot of money and a lot of fighting going on in that state.
But if the Senate remains with the Republicans, I mean, the way your system works down there is they can basically veto anything the president wants to do, right? I mean, so again, that partisan nature of politics really it precludes the possibility that both parties can get together and work together to solve really big problems. Because that's what you need. You need that joint effort.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to blame the politicians. I don't know where the blame lies, because there are some, when it comes to cultural issues or political issues, you have the circular feedback, you know, where there's a thing going on over here and you want to blame it, but it's also just a thing going on over here. So like, we look at the Republicans, right? Why aren't more Republicans calling out Trump for the not conceding the election, for all these claims of voter fraud, for having anything to do with like people like Rudy Giuliani? Like, why aren't they calling? But it's like Trump is still massively popular in the Republican Party. If a Republican lawmaker steps up and calls out Trump, well, he's just gonna get voted out. People aren't gonna support him anymore. And then where does that get to the end of the day? Like, at the end of the day, your job as a politician should be to be loyal to your constituents. And if your constituents are still massively supporting the president, I don't know if as much as I want to say like you guys should take a moral stand. Like, I mean, I kind of understand. Like, I wouldn't want to speak out against the president if he's got a massive leader or a massive approval in my party, and I'm gonna lose my seat over. Like, what's the point? What do I gain from doing that? You know?
No, I think you make a good point. And you know, party loyalty is important. I mean, like, you know, here in Canada, parties vote along with their parties. If you vote against your party, you're basically kicked out. So you know, you do have a bit more, I think, wiggle room in the states. You do see Democrats voting for Republican measures and vice versa. Maybe not now under this the last administration, but yeah, no, I get that. But like I said, you know, there's so many overarching challenges that we're faced with right now, from global warming on down, that it'd be nice to see these guys get together and actually work towards a common solution, as opposed to keep, you know, chucking shit at each other every second day.
Yeah, I hope so. The gridlock. Yeah, I mean, like, our system is supposed to be slow, but I don't think it's supposed to be this slow. I don't think it's supposed to be impossible to get anything done. And the way that our bicameral legislature works is just unbelievable right now.
Why in the hypocrisy over the appointment of a Supreme Court judge, right? Here's the same party who, under Obama's waning days when he tried to appoint a judge. So we can't do it now because the election coming up. The exact same scenario 4 years later. And the exact same party said, oh, well, we can do what we want now. It doesn't matter there's an election coming up. I mean, people shake their heads and say, like, how could you have said that 4 years ago? And it's a complete 180.
Over the past like year or two, I've been blackpilled so hard on how like electoral politics stuff works. Like, I understand. I feel like I understand all of it. Like, you're going to say whatever you need to do to make your voters happy. At the end of the day, that's it. And then your job at the end of the day is to secure political power. I wish the betting markets would have been open. I'm starting to bet more on electoral stuff because I think if you're in the business of making calls publicly, if you're that confident, you should bet on it. And one thing that I would have put $10,000 on if I had the opportunity was the second Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, I would have put any amount of money that the Republicans are going to push somebody to because that's a Supreme Court pick. In the United States, this is like the cream of the crop of political power.
It happens once a generation.
There is no way that any Republican is like, now, even when I heard those 4 Republican senators come up and be like, oh, we're going to block, nah, you're not going to block anything. No way you're going to give up a Supreme Court pick. But people do whatever they can to secure political power. It's just, how it goes.
Yep, that's true.
So you guys are Canada has had some of the strictest lockdown stuff in terms of travel. Like in terms of being able to travel anywhere in the world. I've noticed that because I was going to travel again, and nobody can go in or out. But you guys are doing pretty shaky when it comes to like coronavirus stuff. I want to say your deaths per capita were about half the U.S., which is
it ebbs and it flows. There's been some inconsistency on certain political levels. I do get the impression now that at least one of the big problems is that in Canada, health is a provincial jurisdiction; it's not federal. So the provinces can basically dictate their own policy, and so there wasn't as much of a sort of a unified effort. That's getting a lot better, and we're getting a lot of good advice both at the federal and provincial levels in terms of what to do with this. You still get stupid idiots that get together, for Halloween parties or whatever kind of thing, and then spread the virus kind of thing. Overall, I think it's going better. The problem is that there's just so much information out there, and you have to pick and choose, what information really reflects, what is the infection rate, what is the lethality rate, is it getting worse, is it getting better? I'm seeing, worrisome headlines in the local newspaper that, this will be a bad winter, it's already cold, it's like approaching 0 here, so what's that, 32 Fahrenheit? So, I mean, winter is coming, and, people will be spending a lot more time inside, so I think we are worried about the possibility it might get worse, but on the other hand, there's pockets of the country where it's hardly appearing at all. It's mostly in the big cities. It's the Torontos, it's the Montreals of this world where you're getting a lot of infections because that's where most of the people live. Where I'm living in a small town, you never hear of it. Like, we take precautions, we wear masks, we wash our hands, keep social distancing, but it simply isn't an issue in a small town where is a big issue in a big city. So it depends on where you are in the country.
I followed you up to that last point. In a lot of rural parts of the U.S., people don't see it, people don't get sick or whatever, but they also don't care about like social distancing or whatever because they don't see
it. See, I'm in a small town of about 5,000 people, and I can tell you categorically, everybody wears a mask at the grocery store, and everybody practices social distancing. Everybody washes their hands when they go in, they go out. Like, it's rote. You don't even think about it anymore. And we've been doing this now for 9 months. Like, we've had the anti-vaxxers and the anti-maskers and that kind of thing, but not nearly to the same extent I think that you guys have had. And no politician has said this is fake or don't worry about it or masks don't work or inject Clorox into your veins or something. That doesn't happen here. You don't see that happening here.
One thing that I wish was possible in the U.S. Is I wish that we could weaponize the extreme amount of like pride and exceptionalism we have in our country to actually do like exceptional things. Like I genuinely do believe that the United States had the capability to be the world leader on coronavirus related stuff. It's really crazy to me when I read about like World War II, how like the countries able to come together in so many amazing ways, as long as you're Japanese, and do a whole bunch of like really amazing stuff in terms of like total war effort. But wearing a mask is just too much of an ask for a lot of people that are old and like veterans. Like, that's crazy to me. It blows my mind.
I know. Oh, so we just celebrated Remembrance Day on the 11th, right? This is your Memorial Days in May. Ours is basically, I think you call it Armistice Day or something. It's the big holiday here in Canada to recognize Canadians who died in the wars, kind of thing. And we think back to that that effort that we all, as you said, we all got together and defeated Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. Took us 6 years, kind of thing, and an atrocious amount of loss of life and damage to property and everything. But we agreed that we had to work to this together, and that's, again, as you said earlier, that's been the alliance that's been carrying us forward for 75 years. And to see what's happened over the past 4 years is really criminal in nature. It was never perfect, and there always are disagreements, but at least we had a common purpose, and the common purpose was democracy. It was freedom of expression. It was freedom of worship. It was, we were going to build these liberal systems. And that's what seems to have been thrown under the bus over the past 4 years by, of all, surprise, surprise, but by of all people, the one power that kind of held it together for 75 years. And there's no question, you guys have, carried the ball for far too long. A lot of countries, including my own, don't spend nearly enough on defense. We've been freeloaders for a very long time. Most of the European Union is in the exact same boat. But to see the one country that we all looked up to as sort of the one that, at the end of the day, when you're up against the wall, who could you rely on is the United States? And we told ourselves, I'm not sure I can rely on that anymore.
This is something that I actually get so irritated about when Trump talks about it. Other people talk about like NATO or whatever, in terms of like countries freeloading or not meeting their military contribution or whatever. My understanding is NATO wasn't supposed to exist to like just make countries contribute to their military budget. NATO was like an agreement, an alliance. Like the U.S. is basically buying influence by getting people into this North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Yeah, it's not just supposed to be about having a strong military. There's supposed to be a lot more going on there, a lot more exchange going on there than just military dominance or whatever. And it seems like at least under Trump, we totally forgot that. Like the obsession became with like countries meeting their mandatory minimum spending under NATO.
The 2%, yeah. Well, the other thing, of course, that has been a major contributor to our ability to maintain the system is intelligence sharing. So I come from the intelligence world, right? And the intelligence sharing we've had since the Second World War. I mean, you've probably heard of the term the Five Eyes Club. That's the five Anglo powers.
Yep.
I mean, there's nothing like that in the history of the planet. We're 5 countries that are, yes, like-minded. We're all Anglophone. We have similar histories. Shared intelligence of that nature so freely. Like, this is the gold standard. And I'm pretty sure, I retired 5 years ago from the Intelligence Committee, but I'm pretty sure some of my colleagues were questioning themselves. I mean, the Americans really, do they really care about this club anymore? Like, are they going to invest in it? Are they going to keep sharing to the same extent? I'm sure they did. I'm sure it didn't collapse completely, obviously, but a lot of the assumptions that we've had, is I guess what I'm trying to say here, the assumptions we've been going forward with for 75 years were being questioned in terms of the reliability of the single greatest power in there. And that really, really hurts because this is important stuff.
Yeah.
This is important stuff for all of us to agree that there is not an ideal system. Democracy is not perfect. Liberal economics is not perfect, but it's probably the best we've got. And maybe we'll get something better. As Churchill said, that democracy is the worst system except for everything else.
Yeah.
So let's keep working on it. But for that whole experiment to be undermined in the way it has, let's just hope that those days are behind us. And that under the Biden administration, we're going to go back to whatever normal used to be before. This news that I just listened to before we started, the idea of the vaccine. So it looks optimistic, promising.
Very optimistic. We thought it would be. A lot of people were saying middle next year was optimistic. So yeah.
Yeah. Now we're looking like early 2021, right? So maybe we'll get back to whatever the normal is going to be in the post-COVID period. Who knows what that's going to be? But I think with the change in administration, with the vaccine, now we can move forward together on the same joint projects with the same goals, knowing that we have an administration in place that at least gets what those questions are and is willing to work with the allies that it's had for the past 75 years.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing that I wish in the United States, I have this crazy idea that we'd have two different governments, one for social issues and one for social economic issues, and then one for one for social issues and one for economic issues, and they could just be totally divorced. Because I feel like there are so many issues that we could come together on in the United States if they weren't paired with political issues. Like if wearing a mask didn't mean that you were like some cuck deep state Hillary Clinton devil Satan worshiper, I feel like everybody in the US would have just done it, like no brainer. I feel like it wouldn't have been a divided issue. Or if we're talking about things like living wage or minimum wage or healthcare, like the fact that these get pegged onto like such hardcore political identities feels so cancerous to the conversation.
Well, it's this freedom issue, right? You've got this notion that these freedoms are somehow, I don't know, they're sacrosanct or they're above criticism or that. So I have the freedom to do what I want means I have the freedom not to wear a mask and infect you. Well, actually, you don't. Like that's not what freedom means. Freedom doesn't mean that you can do whatever you want. And my grandfather ends up dying because he's compromised in terms of his immunity system. That's not what my father and my uncles fought for in World War II. The ability for every asshole to say, I can do whatever I want. I don't give a shit what it does to you because it's my freedom to do so.
Yeah.
That's quite the same thing. So I agree with you. It'd be nice if you could sort of divorce that notion of the politics of it, which I think is that political side of freedom versus what is socially responsible to do. And it's socially responsible to wear masks and socially distance and wash your hands and not cough in people's faces and recognize that this is a real thing. This is not some kind of fake thing that Hillary Clinton invented in a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. This stuff is serious.
It's so insane to me that like a parent will have a conversation with their child and scold them for being irresponsible because of like how they're driving, and every kid has heard that speech. It's like, if you're going to be an adult, you're going to have more freedom, but with that freedom comes responsibility, and you need to make sure that just because you have more freedom doesn't mean you can go and goof off it. And then that adult will run out and cough on people and say something because they don't think they have to do that. And it's like, really? Okay. Okay. Oh man, I'm totally ignorant of this. So questions about this because I just haven't followed any of it. A boatload of peace treaties and everything, so like normalization, relations between like UAE and Israel, like all of this stuff has been signed recently, or supposedly signed recently. I haven't followed any of it. Do you have any opinions on any of the, I guess, like some of the new peace treaties that have been signed in the Middle East? Do you think these are positive going forward, or?
It's a mixed bag. So 3 countries so far have signed peace deals with Israel. So there's UAE, as you mentioned, there's Bahrain, which people can't find on a map, and there's Sudan, of all places. So Sudan was recently on the Americans' terrorist sponsor list, got taken off the list because it signed a peace treaty with Israel. So a little bit of politics going on there, right?
Okay.
I think what worries me about these is that they were rushed through. A lot of money exchanged hands, by the way, to convince these countries to do this. And it was seen as a win for the Trump administration. Hey, look at us. We're getting the Arabs and the Jews to talk. Isn't that great? So, and the other thing it did is it basically took the eyeball off what Netanyahu has been doing in Israel ever since he became prime minister. His policies in the West Bank, the expansionist nature of the settlements and things like that. He was able to basically say, well, hey, I've got peace treaties. So obviously the Arabs don't care about the Palestinians anymore because they're signing peace treaties with me. That to me was highly problematic. And look, I'm not saying that the Palestinians are always right. I forget who said it was that the Palestinians never miss a chance to miss a chance. And that certainly is largely true of the way they've done their politics over the past 75 years. But I think that, Israeli domestic policy is, they basically have said, we don't really give a rat's ass about the Palestinians. We're not going to sign, we're not going to make any kind of progress in terms of, a Palestinian state. We're going to keep encouraging the encroachment of Jewish settlements into the West Bank so that there'll be facts on the ground whereby there cannot be a Palestinian state because there's no territorial contiguity to create a state. So yes, it's kind of good that states that were formerly, at least on paper, at war with Israel for decades no longer are. But I think this is just a political move to essentially, boost the egos and to boost the chances for re-election of people like Netanyahu and Trump. And of course, in the Trump case, it didn't work out, so thank God for that. But I don't put a lot of faith in what all this stuff means. It doesn't mean that you're going to see less terrorism in Israel by Palestinians against Israelis. You're still going to see I don't know if you've been following, but COVID in Israel has been a huge problem. And one of the main reasons for that is the ultra-Orthodox Jews refuse to social distance. And they refuse to wear masks. So a lot of the major infection sites in Israel are in these ultra-Orthodox communities. These people are Jewish extremists. And there's a very small wedge of those Jewish extremists who are violent in nature, who will carry out terrorist attacks in the occupied territories against Palestinians. And so, by signing these treaties, you kind of say, well, we don't have to worry about this anymore. Like, why bother talking about a peace treaty? It's no longer necessary. We're going to set that one aside. And the bottom line is you just can't set it aside because this thing has been a festering sore for the better part of 75 years. You just can't sweep it under the carpet because you signed a peace treaty with Bahrain, which people can't find on a map. It just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Gotcha. So the 3 countries, because I'm sorry, just because I wasn't. So you said it was the UAE, Bahrain, and Sudan with Israel.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Gotcha.
There's talk the Saudis might as well. If the Saudis do, and I'd be surprised if they did, but stranger things have happened. Then you see a lot of the other states, maybe Oman would, and maybe Kuwait would. Although Kuwait tends to be a little bit independent of their foreign policy. maybe Qatar, what about Saudis? The Saudis hate the Qataris, so who knows what's going to happen with that. But I think if the Saudis ponied up, I think you'd see a major shift. Again, to what end? I'm not entirely certain.
Okay. What do you think about? So I'm feeling a little bit of questions from chat. So what do you think about like ISIS expansion into places like Southeast Asia, like Indonesia and whatnot? Do you think these are things to be concerned about for the future, or?
Well, let me show you something. Hang on a second here. I wrote this book back in 2016 called The Lesser Jihads. It's all about the ISIS affiliates around the world. And I got bad news for your listeners. Despite the president's claim that ISIS had been defeated in 2019, it's maybe not as strong as it was back in 2014 when it created the caliphate. But I do follow news on a daily basis in that part of the world. There are daily attacks by ISIS against Iraqi and Syrian forces. There are at least 20 ISIS affiliates around the world. Some of them are very strong. I don't know if you heard the news this last week, where an ISIS affiliate in Mozambique, of all cases, on the southeast coast of Africa,
somebody in chat specifically asked about the Mozambique thing, yeah.
Beheaded 50 villagers. This is an ISIS wannabe affiliate. So the affiliates are doing very well. There's an ISIS affiliate in the Democratic Republic of Congo. There's ISIS affiliates in the Sahel, in Nigeria, in Southeast Asia, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, et cetera, one in Yemen. There's that. And then there's, with the Vienna attack last week, there's a wannabes. There's guys that are, probably can't spell ISIS, but are doing things in ISIS's name. And then ISIS says, yeah, that was our guy. These guys, they didn't know this guy from Adam yesterday. But when he does something like what happened in Vienna or what happened in Nice or what happened in Paris, ISIS says, yeah, we inspired the guy to do so. And they probably actually did do their propaganda. Bottom line is that, so when we talk about terrorist groups, we used to talk about it on 3 different levels. There's the core, so core Al-Qaeda, core ISIS, etc. There's the affiliates. It's like ISIS in Mozambique, ISIS in Nigeria, etc. Then there's the third level, which are the kind of the lone actors, the wannabes.
People, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the bad news is that on all 3 levels, Islamic State is doing very, very, very well.
Where do they get their funding from now? My understanding is that initially it was like
funding for what? The guy who beheads a teacher in Paris, he goes into his kitchen and gets a butcher knife and he cuts the guy's head off. The kid in Vienna, he got out of jail. Got access to a firearm and started shooting people. I mean, what does that cost?
Yeah, so like third tier and second tier, I can understand not requiring funding, but it seems like the core group needs some type of money to stay alive and to coordinate like with large groups of people, whatever. And my understanding is that most of the money came from like Syria, like running those oil fields and selling it up in Turkey.
It was oil fields. It was actually they did a lucrative business in stolen art and stolen artifacts like antiquities.
Okay.
So obviously a lot of that's been cut off. So I don't actually know where the funding is coming from. Clearly, they're able to operate on the ground. I would think that part of the equation is the fact that weapons are easy to get in that part of the world. So the weapon part, you don't have to get weapons shipped from Russia or whatever. They're basically lying on the ground, be able to use.
Sure.
In terms of everything else, this is one of the misnomers about terrorism. Terrorism's not expensive most of the time. 9/11 is kind of your odd person out because 9/11 is a huge operation. What ISIS and what Islamic State's been doing over the past couple of years is something what I call it's called a Nike model of terrorism. Like just do it. You don't expect a check from us. Don't expect instructions from us. Don't expect guidance from us. Just do it and pick up a knife. Get in a car. Like the guys in Barcelona driving down the street in Barcelona, taking out 20 people out for a Friday whatever it was evening stroll. So terrorism is not an expensive operation for the most part. So yes, the core guys got to figure out where the money's coming from. They're obviously getting it from somewhere because, as I said, if you read the Iraqi news or the Syrian news on a daily basis, there's at least one attack every couple of days. So clearly they're not defeated. Let's put it that way.
Well, do you have anything else you want to chat about?
We talked about Iran a little bit, right? I'd like to get back to Iran for a little bit.
Did we talk after the killing of Soleimani, or?
No, just earlier on we talked about the nuclear accord.
Oh yeah, the joint plan of.
Yeah, the joint whatever the hell's called, JCO, whatever the hell's called.
Yeah.
So before I was a specialist in Islamist extremism, I was actually an Iranian analyst. I was fluent in Farsi. I studied Iran for 20 years. So I have a really good knowledge of what makes Iran tick. And in my humble opinion, and there are many who disagree with me, is that, and for understandable reasons, we have seen Iran as like the boogeyman since 1979. Well, no shit, Sherlock. They took your embassy over in Tehran and kept, 54 people hostage for 444 days. There's one way to piss off a state. They certainly aren't helpful in the region. They sponsor militias in Iraq. They sponsor Hezbollah in Syria.
Everywhere, Hamas, and everything.
Yeah, exactly. So they're a pain in the ass kind of thing. But we've painted Iran as being the most dangerous terrorist threat in the world. And I think if you look at the numbers in terms of what's actually been happening over the past 20 to 30 years, you look at the number of actual attacks that have been carried out by terrorists, you look at the victims, numbers of fatalities, so numbers of wounded and killed, and you add it all up, what you'll find out is that 99.9% of those attacks and fatalities were caused by Sunni Islamist extremists. Iranians are Shia Islamist extremists, and the two can't stand each other. So when people say that Iran is the problem, they are a problem, they're not the problem. Because it's the Sunnis, many of whom are basically, we were sort of suckled at the Saudi teat in terms of Wahhabi ideology. They're the terrorists that have been causing us problems for the past 40 years. And yet we paint Iran as sort of the bad man that we have to sort of corner. And again, I'm not an apologist for the Iranians.
Yeah, right? There's a difference between like our publicly, what we talk about is dealing with terrorism, but in terms of the government, I don't know if the government actually cares about terrorism that much because I don't know how much that impacts us. But geopolitically, Shia-affiliated people in the Ayatollah and all of that, people like Iran and Syria, and maybe Iraq coming soon, are going to be more thorns on our side than any of the Sunnis are, right? Because we're friends with the Sunni states and we kind of like them for the most part.
No, I get that. You're right. Yeah. I get that, right?
So like Saudi Arabia might sponsor more terrorism, but Iran is sponsoring terrorism against states that we care about, whereas Sunni extremism,
yeah. But I do think that the nuclear accord that the Obama administration got the Iranians to sign was actually a very, very good deal. And I think when Trump threw it out on day 2 of his administration, that would just spite. I mean, he was going to undo everything Obama did, right? I mean, healthcare system, all that kind of whatever Obama signed, Trump didn't like. So it didn't matter whether it was good or bad or indifferent, it was thrown out kind of thing. My understanding is that the Biden administration is going to renegotiate that treaty with the Iranians shortly after taking office in January.
Yeah.
That to me is good. I think Iran's under a lot of pressure right now. Iran has also suffered from COVID at astronomical levels on a per capita basis. So they're in a very weak position.
Yeah, we don't talk about it, but there was a lot of their leadership, I think, or a lot of like high people ended up getting infected and I think even dying in Iran's government.
Yeah. So the time right now to negotiate with the Iranians is ripe, and I think the Biden administration gets that. So I think that the whatever the renewed accord is going to be called, what it's going to look like, will be an even better accord with the Iranians. And the first one was pretty damn good based on what. And I'm not a nuclear expert by any stretch of the imagination, but experts were saying this is a really good thing for us to do, and yet it was thrown out. And the Iranians basically said, well, fuck you. If you're not going to honor your agreements, then why would we honor? Why would we? Like, why would we just keep pursuing nuclear weapons?
Initially,
right?
it was.
So I think
I hope that all the recent stuff. I mean, because you got to figure we killed Soleimani, who's like an Iranian celebrity. I'm not gonna say it's our fault, but they shot down that plane on accident that was flying over Tehran, and that went down, and everybody was killed. I know that we had the limpet mines going on, and then we had the I think Iran attacked a Saudi refinery. I think it was a drone attack, wasn't it? So
I've heard that, yeah.
I think things are chill now, but they were spiking up for a little bit. But we forget.
But ask yourself this, right? When Soleimani was killed way back in January, right? I mean, how much of a real serious level or serious degree has happened since that time? And there's a lot happening in the background. I mean, when you work in Intel, you learn about all kinds of things that don't make the front page of the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. But you haven't seen this spike in really serious stuff since that time, which leads you to question: is it really that bad? And my answer is I'm not entirely certain it is. To give you an analogy, you probably read in the days following the election in November, you'd see a spike in right-wing terrorism in your country, right? All these right-wing nut jobs, the white nationalists, the white supremacists, the neo-Nazis, the blah blah blah, the militias, who would accept the result, were convinced by their commander-in-chief that it was a stolen election. You would see a spike in violence against polling stations, whatever kind of thing. Yeah. Can you name me one single attack that's happened since the election in your country?
Nope.
Nope.
However, I don't know if it's for lack of desire or just for lack of resources. With maybe the coronavirus slowed everything down. I mean, I hope that what you're saying is correct. That like Iran that's just what is it, like water off the back or something? It's just whatever, and they don't care that much. It seems hard to believe, but maybe they don't, and then we can kind of move forward in a positive way. But
But they're also in trouble economically, and I think that you've got the Iranians themselves would embrace a deal tomorrow. The Ayatollahs, the Ayatollahs would not, but the Ayatollahs reckon maybe they don't care because they're the ones that are being fed and clothed kind of thing. But the economy is in the shitter.
Yeah, I've heard the sanctions have a massively negative impact. What is the motivation for the United States to engage in some type of deal with them though, rather than wait for the country to collapse and then try to support a new leader, like almost like a coup, like supporting a new leader that sits in instead of loyal to the US?
You could do that. The problem is if you wait, what if what you get in the aftermath is worse than what you have right now? Why not deal with a partner that is severely weakened and would probably sign a deal just to get some kind of relief from the sanctions and do things it wouldn't normally do? Whereas if you let things sort of happen naturally, do you have any idea who's going to come next? Is he going to be a better person? Is it going to be a worse person? I mean, I don't think we don't have crystal balls, right? And I don't think that we can rely on the fact that, well, since most Iranians want to actually do a deal with the West and see the West as actually a model as opposed to the other neighbors, there's no guarantee that's going to happen that way.
I mean, I agree and I understand, but it seems like in the past, with people like Hussein or Gaddafi, it seems like we're willing to just kind of roll the dice on these people and see.
Well, and where'd that get us, right? Yeah. I mean, look at Libya right now. It's a shithole. Yeah. Look at Iraq's a shithole. I mean, it seems to me that there's enough of an importance around this particular deal with the Iranians, and I think the Biden administration will actually go forward, knowing it's negotiating from an extreme position of strength with the Iranians, and that it'll get a lot of concessions from Iran that it maybe wouldn't have gotten a couple years ago. So to me, you strike when the iron's hot, and the iron is really, really hot in Iran right now. So I would do it if I was the Biden administration.
Gotcha. Yeah, I hope so. Speaking around all of this, one of our prime drivers in the Middle East, what do you think about Putin stepping down soon?
Yeah, sure, why not? Yeah, I mean, he's going to do that, right? I mean, we're faced with this really interesting phenomenon, and you have these leaders that have convinced themselves that their shit doesn't stink, and that no one else could do what they're doing. So Putin will be empowered to 2035, I hear, he'll be hold power. You're seeing this in a lot of African countries now in the wake of elections, is that all these countries have 2-term limits, like you guys do, 2-term limits, right? Well, if this guy gets elected the second time, all of a sudden the constitution miraculously changes overnight, and all the term limits are thrown out. So we're at the
Morales' party in Bolivia, right?
Erdogan in Turkey. I think we're faced with this phenomenon where these strong men have this thirst and this lust for power, and there's no goddamn way they're going to give up on it. There's no way that they're going to let someone else run the show. And so, I mean, Putin's part of that. Erdogan's part of that. A lot of the African presidents/dictators are part of that. I mean, Modi in India is showing some really worrying signs of Hindu extremism. Now, albeit, I mean, India is a democracy, and they have voted him in. Just recently got reelected at a vast majority. But a lot of what he's doing is raising a lot of eyebrows too, in terms of kowtowing to some really nasty Hindu terrorists and Hindu extremists in India. But that just seems to be the flavor of the day right now. Is these people they're just convinced that it's my way or the highway, and my way is the best way, and I'm not going to step on it anytime soon.
Okay, this guy's spamming this question a ton. How do you feel about the Hawaii? I'm butchering the pronunciations. I read this. Huawei. Executives detained in Canada, and then the 2 Canadians that were arrested in China in retaliation for it.
Yeah, but it's funny the question comes up. I just did a seminar, or webinar this morning with somebody. We were looking at Chinese technology. Okay, there's no easier way to say that. China is not our friend. They're not your friend. They're not our friend here in Canada. They're not our friend in the West. They are an aggressive power that is antithetical to everything that we stand for. We have basically sucked at the Chinese economic teat now for the better part of 30 or 40 years. Everything that we do is made in China because it's cheaper. We can do it at vast economic savings by doing it there. And as a result, we've basically allowed China to dominate a lot of markets, including our telecommunications market. And yet we see what's happening within China. I'm not just talking about what they're doing in Tibet, what they're doing in Hong Kong and Xinjiang, but their policy is basically to become the world power on a whole bunch of different levels. And part of that is by selling us our technology. And anybody that thinks that they're not going to use Huawei to their advantage is completely unreal and it's completely naive. Now, unfortunately, what they did in Canada when we arrested Meng Wanzhou, who's the chief financial officer of Huawei, at the Trump administration's behest, by the way, they took 2 Canadians and have been held in solitary for the better part of 2 years, or even longer, I think. So, we're being held hostage to Chinese foreign and domestic policy. But speaking as an old Intel guy, why in heaven's name would you allow the backbone of your 5G telecommunication system to rest in the hands of China? Like, why can't we use Nokia, the Finns, or why don't we use Siemens, or why don't we use some Western technology firm that's at least friendly to us, as opposed to a power that stands for everything that we're against? Makes no sense to me. So this standoff between Canada and China just keeps going on and on and on. And at least my government finally seems to be getting the message, because the intelligence services have been telling the government for 20 years that China's up to this. The latest report just came out this week about China essentially harassing Canadian Chinese who are speaking out against Hong Kong, or speaking out against. I've met some Uyghur Canadians who basically have been threatened by Chinese agents saying, "Shut your pie hole," or "Your uncle back home, I get it," kind of thing. They've been doing that for decades, and we've been telling the government that for decades. But because of the economic relationship and the trade relationship, the government chose to ignore it. I'm hoping now, and I'm cautiously optimistic, that people in power finally realize, hey, we've been led down the garden path by the Chinese. This has got to stop. This has got to stop now.
I'm a huge. Have you ever heard the term doomer?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. I'm a very big doomer when it comes to. I feel like China's going to lead the world in most things the next 10 or 20 years. Yeah.
There you are. Yep.
The thing
the
is,
economic trends are such that even they're going to surpass you guys in terms of economics, GDP, and economic output.
It sucks because I don't know if I complain about this general trend to you, but it seems like when people get scared and when bad things happen, people tend to look inward, and it feels like China over the past 20 years has only been looking outward. So while the rest of the world is kind of like creeping up and getting scared and not wanting to talk with or trade with or be part of the European Union if you're the UK, or be part of NATO or whatever, and China is just like getting their hands into everything. And I feel like China is like a country that is of such a size, in order to adequately stand up to them, not militarily, we're not talking about military, but like soft power, right? In order to stand up to them, you need these huge unified bodies, these big multilateral trade agreements, but everybody views that as being weak now, which is very frustrating.
You're probably familiar with what they call the Belt Road Initiative, the Chinese. They're building infrastructure around the world. And they're building dams and power plants, all kinds of stuff.
And all the ports where they lend you the money to do it that they know you can't pay back, so that they can take ownership of it afterwards. Yeah,
well,
so smart.
They know these countries can't pay back. There's a famous case in Sri Lanka. They built a port in Sri Lanka. The Sri Lankans all have a pocket piston. So guess who owns the port? Well, isn't that convenient that China has a deep water port in Sri Lanka in the Indian Ocean?
And they have the agreement set up such that it's their workers, they get to work on it. It's all there. Yeah, like it's
so there's no local economic benefit. There's no trickle-down effect to local economy. It's all foreign workers, and it's all for China's benefit. And yet they parade themselves as being an international partner. Look what we're doing. We're building coal plants in Pakistan. We're building ports in Sri Lanka. We're building oil plants in Ethiopia. Aren't we a good international player? No, you're not. You're doing it for your own projection of strength.
Well, it sucks too, because if the U.S. was to do any of this, I'm pretty sure our own population would call our leaders weak. If the United States was going around lending money for people to like build ports and then they couldn't pay, we'd be like, oh, Trump would be saying like, what a bad deal. Like we got ripped off there. They couldn't pay us back. Like we need to leave. And it's like, it kills me.
And yet we've been standing back and watching this. And part of it, especially over the past 4 years, has been the lack of U.S. leadership.
Yeah.
I mean, if you had a stronger president who actually cared about foreign relations and cared about foreign alliances, the Chinese probably would not have been aggressive. Because A, Trump seemed to have some kind of love affair with Xi Jinping in the first place, and B, he could give a shit at what happens outside the borders. So China says, check mark. We can do what we want because Trump likes our leader, and secondly, he's not going to lift a finger to stop us. Now, there's been some noises recently about, maybe a little bit of pushback, but yeah, kind of 4 years too late, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know.
There's one thing I do want to raise, is what's happening now in Afghanistan. And Trump has been big about the withdrawal of U.S. forces from Afghanistan, about the peace talks in Doha, in Qatar.
I don't think we've withdrawn troops from any. I think we still have troops in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. But I know he's talked about it a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, he has. And see, this is where there's kind of a two-edged sword. So one of the problems is that when you send your soldiers abroad and you essentially occupy another country to some extent, in a counterterrorism campaign. So think what happened with 9/11, right? You guys went in, Canadians went in, NATO went in a big way to find Al Qaeda, to find Bin Laden, and to bring the people who caused 9/11 to justice. That was a counterterrorism campaign. We're still there 20 years later. And the problem is when you stay there that long, is you cause a lot of anger on the ground. Because military strikes, drone strikes go awry, civilians get killed, you're eating up too much of the economy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So being there actually causes more problems than you're probably solving. Afghanistan is not safer today than it was on 9/11. If you look at the Afghan news on a daily basis, the violence is up 50% over the past 3 months. And these are Taliban attacks on Afghan civilians and on Afghan military. The Taliban is the main so-called peace partner in these talks. And I've said, and many others have said, so hang on a second here. The terrorist group that sheltered Bin Laden and allowed him to carry out 9/11 is now your peace partner in Afghanistan. And we know that if the United States withdraws its troops, the Afghan government cannot control the country by itself. The Taliban will become the functioning government of Afghanistan. And we also know from what we see in open source that the Taliban still work with Al-Qaeda. So what will change after 20 years of occupation?
Yeah, well, I mean, we have to negotiate with the Taliban, not because it's what we wanted to do, but I mean, because we failed in Afghanistan.
Because
Right?
it's the only one.
Yeah.
So, but you see, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, right? And I'm not saying that troop withdrawal is not a good thing. It is a good thing because eventually you have to cut bait because Afghanistan's not much safer. The problem is that once you leave, it's probably going to get much worse. So in 5 years' time, do we ramp up troops again and go to Afghanistan because there's been another terrorist attack planned and executed out of Afghanistan on Western targets? See, I
think it feels like the problem, especially in lieu of the Afghanistan papers, the problem it always feels like with recent foreign policy in the Middle East is even privately, it feels like there's not a clear mission objective sometimes.
No.
That lack of mission objective, like we have enough military might, I imagine, to do almost anything. We'd probably blow up the moon if we wanted to. But if we don't have like a clear objective and nobody really knows what's going on and we're just pouring, man, some of the reports on how much money we were just like, I think somebody would be assigned to like a 5x5 house block and they'd be given like $10 million a week to spend, like spend it somewhere. And it's like, Jesus, I don't know, like that is insane. Yeah.
No, you're right. There wasn't. The only plan was to locate Bin Laden and bring him to justice, and it took us 10 years to do that, right?
It wasn't even Afghanistan. It was in Pakistan.
It was Pakistan, I know. But so this is just my point is that the other book that I wrote after Lesser Jihad was called An End to the War on Terrorism. We have to stop seeing this as a war on terrorism. There has to be a better way to prosecute counterterrorism operations. And I've said, and my bias showing is that you want your security intelligence and law enforcement agencies to be at the pointy end of the stick. The military has a role to play, but it can't be the only role out there. And as someone very wisely said after 9/11, whatever you do, don't declare a war against the common noun. Because those don't end very well, right?
You'll fight this war forever. Yeah, war on drugs. Yeah, none of these wars. We lost the war on drugs. We're legalizing marijuana across the U.S. We lost the war on poverty. I go outside. I'm in LA. I see it everywhere. Like, it's a really stupid way of.
So I mean, I both understand and I can criticize this move to withdraw troops because it really is a damned if you do and damned if you don't situation. Bottom line, Stephen, is that Afghanistan has remained a very, very violent place for a very long time, and it's the only country I can think of where terrorism poses an existential threat. No other country I can think of. It's larger and smaller.
I'm curious. When you say terrorism poses an existential threat, do you include? Do you include like do you include the Taliban in that? Like,
I do. Because they are a terrorist group.
Isn't it a little bit different? I might be trying to. But isn't the Taliban like? Don't they have legitimate claim? Okay, hold on. I'm about to make some potentially very, very bad comparisons. Tell me if I'm wrong. But so you have like you have the Kurdish regional government, KRG in Iraq, right? Where they have like a decent claim to being there. They've been there a long time. They have their own region. Doesn't the Taliban? I'm not saying the Kurds are terrorists, but doesn't the Taliban have kind of like a similar claim in terms of its existence in Afghanistan, where they can claim like we've been here for a long time, like this is our land, like we ought to be able to run some of this the way the KRG does in Iraq? Or
yes and no. So yes, in the sense that they are obviously they are Afghans and they've been there for a very long time. The problem is twofold. One is that the system of governance that they're going to impose. We saw that in the early 90s, right? Girls can't go to school, women don't have rights. It was absolute heinous crimes against the Afghan people. And some might say, well, that's Afghanistan. I mean, the Taliban are conservative Muslims, and they're going to run the show the way they want. And maybe make the argument. The other problem is that the Taliban, in fact, have and still are housing Al Qaeda. There's an Islamic State affiliate in eastern Afghanistan that doesn't necessarily get along with the Taliban, but the ethos and the ideologies that Islamist extremist groups have are consistent with what the Taliban wants to do as well. So the Taliban may not be carrying out acts of terrorism against the United States, Canada, West, whatever kind of thing, but they're going to be either turning a blind eye to or actively encouraging and assisting other groups that will. That's why I would call it a terrorist regime, in that they are not going to do anything to thwart or to undermine or stop. And they made the promises that they wouldn't allow Al Qaeda to, gain a resurgence if the peace talks succeed and the Americans get out. That's complete bullshit. There's already open source intelligence that shows they're working with they have worked with Al Qaeda since 9/11. Nothing's changed. So why would we expect in the aftermath of a withdrawal that the Taliban are going to change their spots and all of a sudden become something that we can work with? I don't see that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure how they would function if they.
Let alone the Afghan people having to live under the Taliban regime again. And again, maybe that's not my thing to say or your thing to say as Americans and Canadians.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
But do we really want, to subject the Afghans to that kind of rule? We saw what happened when Taliban were running the show, right?
Yeah.
And maybe it's out of our business, right?
It's rough because it feels like if we were to levy that same criticism, everything in the Middle East is so messy, but we could levy that exact same criticism theoretically at Turkey as well, right? Like,
we can.
Yeah, but when in 2013 onward, when ISIS was running those oil fields, those trucks were driving right on north of Turkey, and that's exactly where they're selling things. And then, love them or hate them, when Russian planes were flying down to bomb ISIS installations and whatnot, Turkey was shooting those planes out of the sky.
Well, but that's the problem with foreign policy, right? Is that you got to get to the point where you don't agree with what's happening in country X, Y, or Z, but invading that country and changing it by force, like what happened in 2003 in Iraq. How did that one go, right? With the removal of Saddam Hussein.
Well, the removal was pretty good and easy, but everything
the aftermath
really
was great, right? So I think when you're a foreign policy advisor, you have to sort of weigh these things. Is that yes, we don't like what's happening in Turkey, like what's happening in Russia, what's happening in Afghanistan, whatever kind of thing. But do we really want to change it by force? Because it's the old pottery barn rule, right? If you break it, you own it, and that's what happened in Iraq. That's what happened in Afghanistan. So I'm not saying there are easy solutions. There are no easy solutions to any of this stuff. And I get really ticked when I hear these so-called experts say, "Well, just do this, just do this." No, you just can't just do this because there are costs to this and there are repercussions to this, and all this stuff is really complicated. I mean, life is complicated, and there are a million different factors that come to play on any given thing. So I just wish we recognize that these things are really, really hard, and posing or proposing simplistic solutions to them never seems to work out. So maybe we should just stop doing that.
Yeah. It's foreign policy is rough. Middle East sucks.
That's the conclusion to our conversation, is it?
Yeah. Let's see. Going forward, we've got the coronavirus vaccine, which hope that God comes out soon because clearly we cannot manage ourselves otherwise. Do you see Macron's comments spurring on any sort of?
Yeah, I'm really glad you raised that. This has been really interesting. So, just to give your listeners some context, the French security services, so the domestic security service, has identified somewhere between 18 and 20,000 French citizens who they worry about. These are radicalized French citizens who have drunk the ISIS Al Qaeda Kool-Aid. Okay, they're Islamist extremists. No security service can monitor 18 to 20,000 people.
Sure.
Now, having said that, when I worked in intelligence, you realize that the vast majority of people who talk the talk, they don't walk the walk. Most of them couldn't organize a piss up in a bar, right? So they talk online, they push it online, they've got no intention or capacity to do something, but a certain percentage do.
Which
and the
is
challenge,
unfortunate, even if it's low, 1% or 0.1% of 20,000 people, you know,
that's
like
right.
100.
And the challenge is which 1%, right? So what you do is you have to kind of look at everybody to determine who are the real McCoys in this bunch and who are the wankers, and that takes time and takes resources. The other thing is that, so setting extremism aside, which is something every state is expected to put a damper on, there's the ideology that feeds the extremism, that feeds the violence. And this is what Macron's been talking about this Islamism that has been feeding violent extremism. And this is where you're getting into hot water, right? Because people conflate Islamism with Islam, and the two are very, very different terms.
Sure.
But, you know, the Turks